Right. So sit it upright first of all, and open your hands together. Tapping over your face. Just paying attention to the sensation of the tapping. And then over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and your arm. Side. Part of the chest. Belly. And your legs. Sitting back, feet out. Having your feet out naturally makes you recline back in the chair. Just allow that, allow yourself to sink back. Take a couple of slow, gentle breaths. And again, just paying attention to this feeling of body and mind beginning to settle, whatever sensations there are, wherever they occur. Just in the background, your own awareness. We've all got enough experience with this process to have a sense of what is required of you, if you like, to get that real sense of your weight dropping back. So just maybe aware of those points of contact with the chair, but not restricted to that. There's always a very personal element to this process, I think. And then bring your feet in, and when you do that, again, it's quite natural for you to come more to the upright position. Have a little think about your chair and sort of, again, you're all experienced enough to be able to have a sense for kind of like you probably picked your chair, but it's sometimes worth it to show you, for instance, these high density foam blocks that they use in yoga. If you're struggling to feel the weight in your feet, then that might help, because it just raises the feet a little bit. And especially if you're inclined to sit back, to give your back a bit of support, this can feel quite useful. You can also use something like this to go behind you to give that extra support for your back. There's all sorts of things you can do to just make sure that you've got the right sort of dimensions in the chair, and you want to be able to feel, get in the right place, and to be able to feel that again you're supported, and again that you're able to let go, and again notice for a few moments those sensations in your body. Are they the same? Do you feel you won't feel your weight leaning back, of course, but on a more subtle level, is there any repeat of the feelings that you had previously when you were sitting back, or are there different feelings? What happens if you move your feet, and so on and so forth? And it's worth spending time with this. There's benefits to both mind and body when we do this, particularly, I think, from this meditational point of view, that the focusing of our attention, the awareness, and the quietening, the calming of of our minds will really benefit from this sort of quite detailed contemplation of what's happening within your body. Breathing coming nice and smoothly, and if possible, just feeling this expansion in your body, beginning in your belly, rising up into the solar plexus, and then into your chest. Very subtle in the belly, a bit more obvious in the solar plexus, and usually fairly clear to us in the chest. So this bellows breathing, another little sort of element that you can bring in. And again, the focus of attention on your breath will be beneficial for both mind and body. And just slowly turning your head. And then your shoulders. Going forward. Hands down by your side. And then winding around. And then back the other way. Rest your hand. Tilt forwards a little bit. And then push yourself back. So you're using your legs to move you backwards, your hips to move you forwards. But think about what's happening in your pelvis, and from your pelvis up the spine. Our spine shouldn't be held rigid when we do any of these movements. And overall, the spine is fairly straight, but within that sort of range, there are these gentle little curves. Our spine is quite a kind of flexible structure. Keep doing this, but if I do it standing, then perhaps you'll get a better idea of what I'm trying to get at. So I tilt my pelvis and I go through there, and what I feel is a very gentle curve through my spine. It's not this. I'm still basically upright, but it's just there. If you imagine you've got a spider plant or something like that, and the leaf comes up and it curves a little bit. If it curves too much, the leaf will break. But just a gentle little curve is actually quite a strong structure. And that's quite an interesting feeling, because it brings a bit of life into your spine. So it can feel as though your back and your spine have been very gently massaged. If you move too far, you'll lose that feeling. You turn a little bit more difficult to keep that, but make sure you turn from your hips, not twisted your shoulders around. In the other direction. Now come back to the center and just tilt from side to side slightly. I'm probably overdoing it here. So now your spine is just gently curving from one side to another. Again, I'm going to show you standing. Keep doing this. So here, I do this. If I go forward and backwards, it's this kind of movement. Hopefully you can see more of what's going on in my hips and pelvis. And likewise, I go side to side. And what we really want to do is to try and combine those movements so it becomes circular. So I tilt over and back and so on and so forth. Then this is quite a difficult movement to do in the chair because you're actually sitting on your pelvis. So you're not going to get the same kind of, to show you a bit more, you're not going to get that same kind of movement in the pelvis. You will get some. And you'll also notice more your weight moving. We will do that exercise together standing later, but it's the same kind of idea, that feeling that your spine, your back are being very gently massaged. The standing exercise is one that I've done with Grandmaster Chen Xiaowang, who apparently, when he managed to hurt his back at one point, used it a great deal in actually recovering from that injury. I want to imagine, remember that image of the spine as the pearl necklace, the string of pearls. So it's not a kind of wrenching around. It's like the plant floating in water, the string of pearls just moving around a little bit. You feel how that movement spreads out, radiates out from that center point all the way through your body into your ribs, the organs in your belly, the solar plexus, the muscles of your back, and so on and so forth, maybe even down to your legs. And then in the other direction. So one of the problems with an exercise like this is that what you will see is my head moving around. That was why I did the exercises standing, so that you could see, or at least have some sense of what was happening in the rest of my body, what I was feeling. But it's not this, it's not just your head going around, it's your whole body moving as one unit. So it's quite an important exercise, seeing as how what it does do is establish an internalized movement that we maintain and build upon. Okay, so now come back to the center, taking a step forwards and then back. and then on the other side. So I deliberately gave you quite a lot of detail with that previous exercise because it is very easy to get wrong. And the classic error is to just move in the upper part of your body. It's really the whole of the upper body, not just the shoulders and your neck that are involved in that. It's always very, very subtle, and even more so in the chair-based exercise. Now, bird folds its wings. So hand palm forwards, your weight goes forwards, your arms rotate. And then back. And then fisherman cast the net. Now the arms begin to swing from your shoulders. As long as you're not holding your shoulders tight, remember that movement in your back and your spine, and just let that build into your arms rather than straining in your arms and your shoulders to make them move. Remember your weight is moving as well, so that adds obviously quite a big sense of momentum, of energy to the movement. Notice that for most of the time, my elbow and my hand are behind my shoulder. They only really swing past as I settle into my hip. And then when I go forwards, as I settle into my feet. And even here, as my elbow comes up, I start to go back. So even as my hand is still swinging forwards, my shoulder and my elbow are beginning to go back. Same thing here, my hand is swinging forwards, my shoulder starts to, sorry, my hand is swinging back, my shoulder starts to swing forwards, it draws on the elbow. So there's a constant feeling through your arm and your fingers that, excuse me, there's constant feeling through your arms and the fingers, but there's a slight pull on them. So the image of moving through water is quite a good one. It gives you just the right sort of sensation if you can build that up. So these first two exercises, bird folds its wings and fisherman cast the net, really help us to establish a way of moving using the connections in the body, not ignoring the arms, but recognizing what powers the arms, what moves your arms. And that's pretty consistent one way or another. That cycle of movement from the ground up through your body, back down into the ground, repeating over and over again, but with plenty of potential for variation, especially once that movement reaches the upper part of your body. So now changing, rolling the ball in. Here we feel that pull on the fingers increasing slightly as we go back. And if you imagine somebody has hold of your fingers here, you're pulling back and suddenly they let them go and your fingers would swing up. Not that abrupt, but there's the pull and there's the release. And then noticing that feeling of expansion in the front part of your body as that happens. And then drawing your arms apart. Of course, that sort of very gentle curving through your spine helps with the build up and release of energy. Think of your spine as being like a very sophisticated bow, as in a bow and arrow. Curving and releasing, curving and releasing. It's a little bit more complex than that because there's a number of curves going through your spine quite naturally. But again, you don't want to overdo that curving. It's almost a kind of imagined curve. And then change into pushing away. When we start to focus on these very subtle elements in Tai Chi, we may start to notice just a change in the way a familiar movement feels. We don't try to make that change, but observing it means that we can begin to just sort of, well, we can go through a process. Is this a change that I want? Is this beneficial? Is this improving the movement for me? So we observe the movement and we cultivate the movement. Reminds me a little bit of sort of, on the odd occasions I've done some gardening, you go to prune a rose bush or something like that. Actually, the first thing you do is you step back and you have some kind of idea about the shape you want, and then you see the dead wood and whatever else you're going to kind of work with. My feeling is that as we progress in these arts, we're more likely to get it right at the beginning of a change, because body and mind just become that much more attuned to each other. Body, mind, and energy become more attuned to each other. And then hands fisted. Turning out. Just that winding, spiraling movement in your arms as they come back. Hands drop down as the fingers curl in. Yeah. Turn the hands palm down, polishing the table. Now again, we want to be aware of what's happening in our hips and our pelvis. And again, as a seated exercise, it requires a great deal more attention to actually work that out. So once again, I'm going to stand up in a moment so that you can actually see the standing exercise, which is in many ways a lot less subtle. So carry on doing this in the chair. But one thing, I turn, so I've got this movement. So here, if I put my hand on my back, you can see how my back is moving. I turn, I push my hips back, and my hands just slide forwards on the imaginary table. And I come back to here. And again, I turn, push my hips back. So this is like that earlier exercise that I demonstrated, but actually going a lot further, which is why my hips need to go back a long way. I'll show you from the side. There, they go back, which counterbalances the hands on. In fact, it should be that movement backwards that leads your hands. So the challenge, if you like, is to actually see if we can feel those qualities in the chair. So from here, I'm going to exaggerate. I come here and I'm sitting upright, but the first thing that happens is I sort of feel my hips going back. I wonder if I can do it from here. Again, watching my hips, it's here. It's like the first movement is this, except it's actually much bigger than that. It's that feeling of the hips dropping back that initiates my shoulders, my arms and my hands going forwards. It's a really good example of how quite a small movement that really can't be seen actually develops as the origin of the bigger movement. Do one more of these. I've sort of lost count, so talking too much. And then push up. So this is a way of moving that starts with an awareness of sensation, very subtle sensation, sometimes quite deep within the body. All the movements have that. Now, even if you can't feel it in this, I'm not going to try and describe it just yet. Actually, as you become more attuned to that possibility in even one exercise, you're more likely to recognize it in another exercise. It's like if you like looking at plants and you look at plants in your own garden, walking past somebody else's garden, you're more likely just to be aware of what's in their garden as well. So in this sense, the exercises themselves, copying the exercise or doing the exercise as you get more used to it, become the real teachers of this art. So we learn from the exercises and then changing. Of course, you have to learn the exercises first. You have to learn what we might refer to as the choreography. But once we're familiar with that, and that will vary from one movement to another. But in those movements that we do find come easily, and it might be also connected with the image. Wild Goose is a popular movement because it's quite a sort of accessible image to most people. So that too is a factor. And gradually, we just become far more aware of what is happening within the body through that. And then that awareness carries with us to other exercises. And then parting the cloud. Actually, other movements, I should say, not just exercises, because it goes, that awareness stays with you beyond the actual practice of Tai Chi, so we become aware of sometimes of these things as we're washing up or walking down the shops or vacuuming or whatever. And it's really rather lovely to be able to just observe how your body is moving, the interplay of muscle and tendon, ligament, the movements through those structures, the flow. Now, dragon plucks the stars from the sky. One more on each side. So you're not actually moving your weight forwards and backwards, so we don't have the same kind of movement in our spine physically, but still imagining that quality of movement that we felt before. Changing, bringing your hands in, pushing in two directions. One more round. And foot extended, scooping the sea and looking at the sky. And then your hands come down again, loosely fisted and grasping the tiger's head. Same, I'll show you from here, the same sense of movement through your spine. It's not dropping down like that. You're overall, you want to keep this sense of a straight line up through the middle of your body. But there are no straight lines in your body. So when we talk about things like that, think of them as being like grid lines on a map or something like that, or like a, you know, perhaps like a knitting pattern that you're moving around, or even a recipe that you're adapting. So the principles are there. The book, the broad outline is there, and then just observing how your body follows that. So now on the other side, scooping the sea and looking at the sky. So doing well today. That upright line through your body becomes a bit like the mooring post for a boat on the sea. You move away from it, but you can always come back to it. And then grasping the tiger's ears. One more time. Okay, now bring your feet back parallel. With one hand, just making the circle. So in many ways, this is going to be very similar to polishing the table, that same kind of action. Hips going back a little bit, shoulders and head going forwards. Turning in the center of your body. So hips are involved with that as well. And then with your other hand, and then polishing the table. So now with both hands moving, you can't actually move as much, and it's not as clear in the center of your body and your hips. And in fact, if you try and think about it too much, like, oh, this hip is doing that, it'll fall apart. So focus on the overall shape of the movement and just see what is happening, particularly in the center of your body and up through your spine. You know, can you recall some of those qualities from the earlier exercises that are there, probably in a different order and a different balance, but they're still very much there. You don't have to decide the order and the balance, because they're movements that become quite natural to your body. Stirring the beans. Good. Okay. Rubbing your hands together again. Glasses up again. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and your arm. The other side. Belly. And finally your legs. Push one foot up and down, or one heel up and down. So the knee moving, and around. The other side, the other leg. And around. Good. And then stand. Let me just demonstrate what I was saying about that center line of the body. So if I'm here, if the pole represents the center line, then when I push my hips back and my pelvis tilts, I'm still aware of that center line. And so, if I want to go further away from it, my hips have got to go back more, because that doesn't happen if I just do this. My hips went back then. I just sort of bend my shoulders forwards, I fall over very, very, very easily. But this movement is much more stable. So doing the standard version of that circular movement, to stand, have your knees quite soft, and initially just tilting your pelvis forwards and backwards, just a little bit. It's really quite a subtle movement. Try not to lock your knees. So we get that sensation of a curve going back and then going forward. And in the end, you will find there's a little bit of movement in your head and neck, but it's not this. And then side to side. Even this is a bit exaggerated. The smaller the better. Again, if I put my hands on my hips, you can see how my hands are moving. Or maybe my elbows is a better view from here. So now let your hands drop down, and combining those movements. Again, I'm doing this a little bit bigger than I would normally do it myself. So there's this lovely sort of smooth spiraling feeling in the spine. Again, that massaging quality. Just aware of any areas up and down your spine where there's a blockage of resistance to that movement. Be very, very careful around those areas. See if you can really build that massaging quality at those points. Go back the other way. Now see if you can make a nice smooth transition into rooting down, coming to the upright position, letting your pelvis adjust where your weight is in your feet, hips dropping back and hands curling under, rooting down. And then wild goose. Feeling the movement go a little bit further up in your body. I mean, obviously, any movement will move the whole of the body, but just a little bit more spotlighted, if you like, in the area of the solar plexus, middle part of your back. And then part in the clouds. One more time on this, and then we're going to go back to rooting down and do these movements in a little sequence, just to feel the changes between the movements. So here, the main focus point here is belly, lower back. You will feel the movement. You could follow the movement all the way up through your body, but then as you go into the wild goose, it's the belly, and then up into the solar plexus, main focus, and then the part in the clouds, belly, solar plexus, and then up into your upper back and chest. We feel the movement progressing up through our body as the choreography of our arms changes. Just see if you can pay particular attention to the part in the clouds element, so that we get used to that idea that there's a sensation of movement, a tingling, however you experience it, progressing up through your back. And the culmination of that in this exercise, stringing the three together, will be in part in the clouds. One more round of this. Good. And then 1 foot forwards. So again, for all of you, this is a familiar exercise. Just give yourself a few moments to make sure your feet are in the right place, your weight is moving, and then just see if when you make that little bit of a push from the leg, obviously your weight's going to be moving, but can you just detect that same sort of movement up your spine? Perhaps up your spine is a slight misdirection through your spine, shall we say, because we don't want to think in terms of upwards at this point. Using your toes and your heel. Allow more weight to drop into your leg. And then stepping in. On the other side. I can feel that movement in my spine much more clearly in the forward movement. I can feel it in my back and I'm getting more familiar with it, but it's not quite so straightforward for me. But it might be the other way around for you, or it might be related to a particular leg or something like that. When we start to look at Tai Chi in this way, don't have the expectation that it's like, oh, it's going to be this sudden change and a little bit different. We get glimpses of these things. They accumulate until eventually one day we notice that it's kind of there all the time, or most of the time. Raising toes and so on. Whatever progression in Tai Chi, development in Tai Chi is slow, careful. And actually the process itself is beneficial. The process of development, not just the end goal. So going back to that cultivation thing, I think probably, the act of pruning your rose bush is in and of itself potentially useful, if you like, or however you think about it, as well as the end result. Stepping in. And then step through. Nor should we have the expectation that this will be perfect all the way through our spine. Most of us have at least one thing, a strain, a postural habit, or something like that, that means that there will be these little disruptions in the flow. I think one of the things I've learned in Tai Chi is not to get too frustrated about those. Bring your feet parallel. Shake out. Fisherman cast the net. And on the other side. Good, and your feet parallel. Shake out. Good. Go back to your chair. Before I sit, I'm just going to remind you of that exercise that what we sometimes refer to as rolling. It's very much in the hips and the pelvis, this tilting movement. And notice I don't want my head to go right out there. It's that tilting there, tilting from side to side. And then that builds into this nice, smooth, massaging quality of movement in our spine and our back. Just a little bit of circling around in our head. It's not this. Yeah. So a nice little exercise to help you. It's great on the spine anyway, but also to help you understand, I suppose, how this works in Tai Chi and the way the movement, the energy is transmitted from the legs, from hips and pelvis up into the upper body, and eventually, of course, the arms and hands. But for now, just letting your hands drop down, feel the weight of your arms hanging from your shoulders. Embrace tiger, return to mountain. Maybe you get the same sensation, and it could be that last movement, if you're more aware of what's happening in your spine, maybe that's one of these sensations that you can recall when you want to come back to this feeling just anywhere else other than in a Tai Chi session. Just that sense of movement, not just upwards through your spine, but downwards as well. One more time. And rest. Okay, and open your eyes. Lovely. So I hope that was give you a little bit of an extra view and an extra insight.